Mr. Trump coming in. He said that he wants to end the war in Ukraine. He said in 24 hours. Well, that's unlikely to happen. But it's reflective of his position, which is that he views it as a European problem. He views it as expensive. And he clearly wants to come to a position, a deal, as he would put it, in as soon as possible. And that means that the countries within Europe will have to do more.
Well, joining me now is General Sir John McColl. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Remembrance Day today and tomorrow. What does it mean to you?
I think it means different things to different people. For me personally, there's the individual aspect. I think every family across the country is touched in some way by conflict. The conflicts of the past. In my own case, I think of my father fighting in the Second World War. And then more recently, I think of Northern Ireland, Bosnia, Afghanistan, Iraq, and the friends and comrades that I have lost in those conflicts. And the families that I've met, the holes in those families, the lives that have been altered forever, their loss, their aching loss. And I think of the loved ones they've lost every day, and probably more so today than any other day. And this is a day when we should not only think of those that have fallen, but also the families that they leave behind. So that's one.
There are, of course, some people who criticize Remembrance Sunday as being somehow aggressive. I mean, what was the motivation for you to serve your country in the armed services?
Well, I think it's the next aspect of remembrance for me, and that is what was the sacrifice for? And it was for freedom, and it was for liberty. After I left the army, I had the privilege of going to Jersey for 5 years. And of course, the Channel Islands was the one part of the British Isles that was occupied during the Second World War. And every year, on May the 9th, Jersey celebrates their liberation in 1945. And there are still people who live on the island who remember what it's like to lose that freedom and liberty, democracy, rule of law, equality, respect, tolerance, and the freedom of speech. And I hope that on Remembrance Day, we not only reflect on those who have fallen, but also why they fell and why they gave that sacrifice. And I think it is for the freedom and the liberty that we enjoy every day and perhaps take a little bit for granted.
You mentioned the Second World War. Do you feel that rules-based system that was established after the Second World War, I know there were other conflicts, but that system still holds today?
Well, I think that's a very good point. Another aspect, I think, of Remembrance Sunday is the future. Today, up and down the country, many will hear that famous poem of John McCrae in Flanders Fields. But in the last verse, it speaks about the future. What it says is, take up our quarrel with the foe, to you from failing hands we throw the torch to hold it high. If you breach faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields. And that says very clearly that we, either the fallen, have given everything for you to enjoy that precious gift of freedom and liberty. But it's not a free gift. It comes with strings attached. And the conditions are that we, the fallen, expect you, i.e. us, the living, to fight to preserve that legacy. And there's no doubt that legacy is under threat. Look to the East, Ukraine and Russia. Look to the Middle East. Autocracies and dictatorships emerging even across Europe, let alone across the rest of the world, and even across the Atlantic in the most recent election, which seems not only to have been an exercise in democracy, but also a challenge to democracy. And there have been shades of that in our own political system of late. And so, yes, I do think that rules-based system that you spoke about is under threat, and it's beholden upon us reflecting on the sacrifice of those that have gone before us to make sure that we protect it.
You were Deputy Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. Do you feel now that NATO needs to change, that perhaps NATO needs to become a European-focused defense system rather than the US one?
I think that there is no doubt that NATO and the European countries within it need to do more to cater for their own defense. I think that Mr. Trump coming in, he said that he wants to end the war in Ukraine. He said in 24 hours. Well, that's unlikely to happen. But it's reflective of his position, which is that he views it as a European problem. He views it as expensive. And he clearly wants to come to a position, a deal, as he would put it, in as soon as possible. And that means that the countries within Europe will have to do more. And I do think that there's a leadership role for the UK to play there, a bridge, if you like, between the US and Europe. It's a role that we played during the Blair years. I think it's a role that we could play again to great effect. More difficult now that we've left the EU, but nevertheless, there's a role for us to play, although it will be dependent upon a solid commitment from this country towards defence to demonstrate leadership within Europe if we're going to carry the nations of Europe with us, and indeed then to have traction within the United States as a consequence.
And that commitment to defence might mean the civilian population having to give up on other things, might it?
Yes, I think it might. And I know there's a difficult choices for the government, but the security of the nation is the first responsibility of any government. And as we said earlier in this discussion, there is absolutely no doubt that that security and the values that we treasure are under threat at the moment.
The military historian and journalist Sir Max Hastings wrote in the Times recently that he thinks there will be what he called a sellout of Ukraine. Do you think that is inevitable?
I think that, well, Mr. Trump is committed to bringing the conflict to an end. What that actually means, of course, is trading land for peace. And I'm not sure what that will look like, but I'm sure that not only will there be a requirement for Europe to do more in bringing that deal about, but I also think there'll be a requirement for more for Europe to ensure that what comes after it is also peaceful. In other words, it isn't a deal, whatever deal is struck, is not a green light for Russia to continue more aggressive behavior elsewhere within Europe. So do I think there'll be a sellout to Ukraine? I do think that there will be some form of deals forced through. I do think it will come in the form of land for peace. And I think that some will say that is a sellout. Others will reflect that perhaps it is a reflection of the realities of the situation over there. And to do otherwise will simply to sacrifice more Ukrainian lives. Now, I know that many that will object to that strongly, but nevertheless, I think that's probably going to be the case.
I mean, perhaps the balance to that could be security guarantees, a promise of NATO membership, and ultimately of European Union membership for Ukraine.
There will be all sorts of aspects in that could come into play. But I do think, as I've said, if there is going to be a deal that's going to be meaningful, that is not going to jeopardize the long-term future of Ukraine and indeed other vulnerable nations across Europe, then Europe in particular, rather than the United States, has to step up. And my own experience within NATO is that it's going to be a really hard and difficult series of negotiations to deliver.
Finally, do you think the prospects are more dangerous for your children and grandchildren than they were perhaps for you when you were a young man?
For me, as a young man, probably yes. For my father, probably not.
Thank you very much indeed.